All right, so we're talking about P.D. Pablo. And shout out to Cheddar DVD up in Boston for pulling this footage together. Go check his page if you want to see the full clip. I'm working off a screenshot here, but it brought back something I had honestly forgotten about. P.D. Pablo actually signed to Death Row Records back in 2005. And if I'm remembering correctly, Shauna may have been in that same orbit as well, coming out of DTP around that period. But for P.D. Pablo specifically, that signing was essentially the beginning of the end of his momentum in the industry. What makes it so hard to wrap your head around is the timing. By 2005, everything that had gone wrong at Death Row was already public knowledge. The stories were out there, the history was documented. And after everything that had come to light about how that label operated, P.D. Pablo still made that move. And then, almost right on schedule, Death Row folded completely not long after. The label was already on life support, and that signing didn't change the trajectory one bit. Here's the thing though, if you had been in the music business long enough to understand how Death Row was built, you understood that the entire infrastructure of that label was dependent on the specific talent that Suge Knight had assembled during its peak years. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Tupac. Those weren't just artists, they were the engine. Without them, there was no machine to plug into. And P.D. Pablo, as talented as he was in his own right, was not operating at that level of commercial reach. He wasn't in a position to walk into that situation and carry a label back to relevance on his own. Nobody could have done that at that point. The foundation simply wasn't there anymore. But that's what fame can do to a person's judgment sometimes. It creates a version of reality where opportunities look bigger than they actually are, where the risks feel smaller than they should, and where the warning signs that everyone else can see clearly somehow get filtered out. P.D. Pablo is genuinely important to North Carolina. That's not even a debate. That anthem he put out still hits to this day and still means something to people from that region in a way that doesn't fade. He had a run that felt more significant and longer lasting than it actually was on paper, which speaks to the kind of impact he made while he was in his prime. But that Death Row signing was a mistake that a different set of advisors or a clearer perspective on the landscape might have prevented. There was still something left in him as an artist at that point, and a move to a different label with actual infrastructure and industry backing could have extended that chapter considerably. Instead, it went the way it went. Moving on, over in Bournemouth, the Drake copycat ice block has officially melted. And it wasn't just there. Someone pulled the same move out in California, too. People have been taking the concept from Drake's original rollout, grabbing ice blocks, setting them up in public spaces, and presenting them as if they're part of some coordinated campaign. And look, the creativity is there in theory. If something like that had been executed intentionally across multiple cities simultaneously with real coordination and a connected narrative, it could have been a genuinely interesting piece of marketing. But that's not what happened here. These are independent copycats working off the same visual idea without the structure behind it. The original setup in Canada was a completely different situation. That was controlled, organized, and deliberate. The location was secured, access was managed, and the moment where a streamer retrieved the secret envelope was clearly staged to build toward a specific reveal, which led directly back to Drake's house. So, on one hand, the execution was polished and intentional. On the other hand, the actual payoff left people wanting more. We got the ice block, we got a date, and then that was pretty much it. For a rollout of that scale, with that level of build-up and visual spectacle, the follow-through has been surprisingly quiet. No additional drops, no escalating reveals, nothing that keeps the momentum building. At some point, you have to give the audience something to hold on to between the setup and the release, and right now, that middle section feels empty. And that right there is exactly what makes Dame Dash come across as someone who never fully moved on, because the way he talks about his past has that quality to it, that energy of someone still waiting for acknowledgement that may never come. Yeah, you did what you did, the contributions were real, but there's a point where continuing to seek credit for things that happened 2 decades ago starts working against the very legacy you're trying to protect. The audience can only meet you where you are, and if where you are is permanently stuck in 2002, that's a problem. And what makes it more frustrating is that every time it seems like Dame is ready to pivot and build something new, the direction he picks raises more questions than it answers. Motor oil, cookies, an art gallery. These aren't inherently bad ideas, but none of them connect to each other, none of them connect to what people already respect him for, and none of them ever seem to gain real traction before he's moved on to the next thing. There's no through line, there's no brand architecture that makes any of it feel intentional. He publicly announced he was done with music entirely and pivoting to visual art, and then turned right around and started inserting himself back into the independent music space like the announcement never happened. And then there was creative control. That platform had genuine potential. It was an interesting concept that tapped into something real, the idea of artists owning their work, controlling their narrative, and building outside the traditional label system. That conversation was happening at exactly the right moment. But Dame attaching himself to it the way he did created a ceiling. Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and a dozen other platforms where they can build their own audience without needing a middleman. The window where an independent network could have worked by aggregating talent that had no other outlet, that window existed, but it's been closed for a long time now. You can't build a 2009 solution in 2025 and expect the same results. Now, Freddie Gibbs came out and said Kanye West is the greatest rap artist of all time, and separately that Tupac is the greatest rapper. And look, that's his opinion, and it's a defensible one depending on how you define greatness. Personally, when it comes to pure rap craft, the technical execution, the lyricism, the delivery, Biggie edges Tupac for me. Tupac was something else entirely, though. He had a gift for translating real pain and real experience into music that connected with people on a level that went beyond hip-hop. His records carried weight that didn't require you to be a student of the genre to feel. But trying to definitively rank one above the other is a conversation that could go in circles forever, because they were genuinely offering two different things. The comparison almost isn't fair to either of them. Kanye, though, the catalog argument is real and it's hard to dispute. From his early production work through his own discography, across multiple distinct creative phases, the body of work he assembled over a sustained period is staggering in terms of both quality and influence. The only artist in the modern era who can stand next to him in terms of sheer output of consistently strong material is Drake. Love them or hate them, both of those catalogs represent something that doesn't come around often in any generation. Moving on, Big Meech is still getting around on that electric bike, and somebody needs to explain what happened to the fleet of cars he was showing off before. The Porsches, the 911s, all of that energy from earlier, and now every time you see him, he's either riding passenger in somebody else's car or cruising around Miami on what looks like an entry-level Amazon electric bike. Like somebody pulled up and said, "Here you go, big homie, charge it up in the garage, you're good." It's a far cry from the image that preceded his release, and the contrast is hard to miss. Switching gears, Ice Spice has a new partnership with Wendy's, and honestly, when you look at how it came together, the timing is almost too perfect to believe. Here's the background. Ice Spice got involved with the SpongeBob movie soundtrack, contributing to a track called Big Guy, and that song has quietly become massive. When you add up the streaming numbers across Spotify, YouTube, and other platforms, you're looking at somewhere in the range of 400 to 500 million combined plays, possibly more. That's not a small achievement, and it speaks to the audience she's actually reaching right now. It might not be the core hip-hop crowd that she built her initial buzz with, but she's deeply embedded with a younger demographic, the kind of audience that drives fast food traffic and responds to brand partnerships in ways that translate directly into revenue for companies. So when the McDonald's incident happened, and for the record, nothing about that looked staged or manufactured, it had all the hallmarks of a spontaneous moment that nobody planned. Wendy's recognized an opportunity instantly. Ice Spice apparently made a casual comment along the lines of that situation never happening at a Wendy's, and somewhere between that comment and someone on her team making a call, a deal materialized. Wendy's gave her a signature chicken sandwich and a full meal named after her, and Ice Spice added another significant brand check to her portfolio. That's what happens when your reach and your timing align at exactly the right moment. You don't even have to work hard to close the deal. On a completely different note, there's something worth paying attention to regarding automobile kill switches. A federal regulation has been passed requiring that new vehicles manufactured after 2026 include technology capable of monitoring driver behavior and remotely disabling the car under certain conditions.
Now, this technology isn't entirely new. Versions of it have existed in certain GM vehicles and other makes for years already. But there's a meaningful difference between a feature existing in a car and the government mandating it across the entire industry. The moment it becomes a federal requirement rather than an optional feature, the conversation shifts entirely. Because now it's not about what a manufacturer chose to offer, it's about what the government has decided it has the right to control. And that's a conversation that deserves more attention than it's getting right now. On a personal note, I drive a Tesla, and honestly, the reason I went electric in the first place wasn't the environmental angle or the charging convenience, though plugging in at home overnight and waking up to a full charge is genuinely practical. The real draw was the self-driving capability. I'm not someone who loves driving, so a car that handles a significant portion of that experience for me made sense. But the idea of mandatory remote shutdown technology built into every new vehicle on the road is a different thing entirely. There's a version